Hey everyone, welcome back. What I haven't told you yet today is that I'm actually coming to you live from Israel. So it is particularly meaningful to introduce you to four leaders deeply engaged in complex issues here in the Middle East. We're pleased to welcome Israel's ambassador to the United States, Michael Herzog, who will share his vision and priorities for the US-Israel relationship. We're also pleased to welcome Bahrain's ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid bin Abdullah Al Khalifa, who will share insights on the implementation of the Abraham Accords and how he sees progress playing out. Finally, we'll be joined by the newly appointed chair of the Partnership for Peace Fund Advisory Board, George Salem, and JCPA's partner, Reid, the director of ALLMEP US, who will update us on the peace-building work underway in implementing the historic Nida M. Lowy Middle East Partnership for Peace Act. This will be followed by a very special closing plenary on the Haggadot of Freedom, featuring the four leading streams of Judaism.
Good evening. I am Dr. Alan Kadish, the president of Torah University. Thank you for the invitation to participate this evening. Torah has had a long and warm relationship with the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. My predecessor, Dr. Bernard Lander, helped create the framework for the National Jewish Advisory Council, which evolved into the JCPA, and we are proud to be a sponsor of your annual plenary session. Since our inception half a century ago, Torah has had a similar relationship with the State of Israel. With 35 schools and nearly 20,000 students across 5 states and 4 countries, the most vital measures of Torah's identity are the perpetuation of the Jewish intellectual tradition, preservation and dissemination of Jewish culture, and our strong ties with the State of Israel. Torah's Israel programs educate hundreds of students each year, and we are proud to claim a robust number of alumni who have made Aliyah and today are productive, involved members of Israel society. Thus, it is a particular pleasure this year to introduce the ambassador of the State of Israel, the Honorable Michael Herzog. As all of you know, the ambassador was born with both a great blessing and a monumental challenge. Indeed, it is certainly a tremendous zechut to be born into one of the State of Israel's leading founding families. His grandfather of blessed memory was the revered chief rabbi of the State of Israel at the time of its very creation. The ambassador's father served as both the president of Israel and its ambassador to the United Nations. And his brother, as you all know, is the current president of the State of Israel. However, the ambassador has risen to the challenge of his legacy with a distinguished record that speaks for itself. Prior to his appointment last year, Michael Herzog was a retired brigadier general in the Israel Defense Forces and an Israel-based international fellow of the Washington Institute. General Herzog held senior positions in the office of Israel's Minister of Defense. He also served as Chief of Staff to the Minister of Defense. For nearly 3 decades, Ambassador Herzog has played a key role in the Arab-Israeli peace process, participating in most of Israel's negotiations with the Palestinians, Jordanians, and Syrians. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Ambassador Michael Herzog.
Hello all, and thank you for hosting me at the 2022 JCPA National Conference. First, I would like to thank JCPA Chair David Bohm, Senior Vice President Melanie Roth-Gorlick, and the co-chairs of this event, Lee Goldberg and Susan Abravanel. For decades, JCPA has worked to advance democracy, environment, and climate protection, to build bridges between Jewish and non-Jewish communities, and combat hate in general and anti-Semitism in particular. On these issues and more, JCPA has been there ready to move the needle. As some of you may know, I was appointed Ambassador of Israel to the United States after a long career in the Israel Defense Forces, as well as a variety of positions and roles which included decades of peace negotiations on behalf of my country and significant engagement in the field of U.S.-Israel relations. I was raised in a home where Zionism was a central tenet of my education, And I was taught that a connection between the state of the Jewish people and the Jewish diaspora is and ought to be a mutually reinforcing, synergetic connection. All this has shaped my perspective and equipped me to serve my term as ambassador with strength and nuance. Perhaps the most impactful lessons I have learned from my experience in the battlefield, in the IDF General Staff, and in the battle for peace is that we cannot take Israel's existence and security for granted, given the history of our people and the environment we are living in. It is imperative that Israel is strong and just, and that we are capable of defending ourselves by ourselves. Our strategic alliance with the U.S. is a cornerstone of our national security. Indeed, the unique relationship which exists between our two countries is much deeper than just security. This relationship is one that is based on shared values, interests, and core beliefs between our peoples and governments. Here in Washington, I have the honor of representing a historically diverse coalition government in Israel, which spans the ideological and ethnic spectrum from left to right, from religious to secular, and from Jews to Muslims. Given the highly polarized nature of politics today, it is nothing short of a miracle that such a diverse coalition not only was assembled, but continues to effectively tackle the challenges that come its way. It is an example to the world of the power of pluralism and a real case study in coexistence. While I deliver this message to you, a war is raging in Europe, the likes of which we have not witnessed since the Second World War. Anybody with a conscience and a belief in a rules-based international order must condemn the Russian attack on Ukraine, as we, the Jewish people and Jewish state, with our unique history, have done. We stand ready to support the Ukrainian people to the extent possible. We in Israel have been closely following the disturbing rise in anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. This hateful ideology does not reside on only one side of the aisle, but rather it rears its ugly head on both ends of the political spectrum. A more recent outgrowth of anti-Semitism has found a home in a growing camp of those who identify as anti-Zionists, those who claim that the State of Israel has no right to exist. While every government and state can and should be subject to legitimate criticism and welcome open debate, we can see this new brand of anti-Zionism striking a different and concerning tone. These people are calling out the legitimacy and the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. Anti-Zionists imply and often openly state that such a right does not exist. They do not take issue with one individual policy or a specific square mile of land, but rather it is a blanket denial of Israel's right to exist as a state of the Jewish people. We face a concerted international campaign designed to delegitimize the state of Israel, including here in the United States. We must remain aware and be ready to call out those who question and attack our basic legitimacy, and who often do so by attempting to co-opt the plights of other peoples and communities. I see it as part of my mission as ambassador to combat these dangerous trends of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism here in America. And we need not fight such hate alone. We have allies, both new and old, who are committed to fighting this venom. We have allies who've taken a bold stance to change the trajectory of peace and coexistence in our region as well. In the Middle East, a dichotomy has emerged with two distinct camps who have conflicting aspirations for the future. It is a struggle between actors and countries who seek peace and advancement for their societies on the one hand, and on the other hand, by radical forces who thrive on hatred, violence, and incitement. They resist any progress and have a desire to pull us back into the dark ages. Leading the latter camp is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Iran is the number one strategic threat to Israel's national security as well as to regional stability as a whole. Armed with radical anti-West and anti-Israel ideology, Iran espouses nuclear and regional hegemonic ambitions and builds its capabilities and proxy terror armies in order to realize these ambitions. Iran relentlessly spreads its poisonous influence throughout the region, actively funding proxy terror groups along Israel's border, across the region, and around the world. A coordinated strategy is required to push back against Iran's malign activities and influence in our neighborhood. Israel will not tolerate Iran as a nuclear threshold state. We are building our own capabilities, and we will maintain our freedom of action to block Iran from realizing its malign goals. This is a struggle between light and darkness, and Israel is leading the way for those in the region who want to see a brighter tomorrow. Notwithstanding our differences with the U.S. administration on the Iranian nuclear file, we will continue to strive to work in close coordination with our American counterparts, our major regional partners who have already normalized relations with Israel, and others who may be normalized relations with us in the future. In this regard, I see the Abraham Accords as a historic game changer. I strongly believe that the Accords and Israeli-Arab normalization at large are critical for the betterment of our region and for pushing back against dark forces. This is why I am honored to be addressing you alongside my Bahraini counterpart, His Excellency Sheikh Abdullah bin Rashid Al Khalifa. He has been a true partner in the effort to deepen the Abraham Accords here in Washington. We share the same goal of promoting progress, peace, and stability in our part of the world. We will continue to fight for a better future for the next generation and generations to come. I would like to thank the leadership and activists of JCPA who take the time to educate and mobilize to support democracy, peace, and justice, and who advocate for a secure Jewish state. It is thanks to grassroots support from people like you that we continue to see positive change. I commend your efforts and look forward to working together throughout the duration of my term in Washington as ambassador. As we near Pesach, the Jewish festival of liberty, I take the opportunity to wish you all a happy Passover, Chag Pesach Kasher v'Sameach. Thank you all, and God bless you.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to join you today. I am very sorry that I couldn't be there in person. However, the purpose for which you are collecting is no less globally impactful than the very technology that allows me to address you here today. Like this technology that has so affected our lives, the Abraham Accords are an accomplishment of no less biblical proportions. Turning our backs on millennia of division and animosity, it is our hope that the people of tomorrow will only know such transnational tension from history books and Hollywood films. The Abraham Accords have reset the way that the oldest civilizations on earth look at each other, treat each other, and build a future with each other. But as with any structure, the Accords are only as strong as their foundation. And for this great structure, our governments make up that foundation. In the first 19 months since the Accords signing, leaders of both Bahrain and Israel have worked tirelessly to build heavily upon government relationships. And I am proud to say that this shared focus has yielded 37 MOUs, the establishment of formal embassies in one another's land, complete with ambassadors, and government delegation exchanges of the highest levels. Most notably, Prime Minister Bennett's visit to our kingdom, during which he was received by both His Majesty the King and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince and Prime Minister in a most public and celebratory manner. As further proof of the expected endurance of these agreements, one undeniable effect of this initial government-to-government work has been the establishment of personal ties As more and more government personnel from each of our nations have gotten involved, we have witnessed a growing interest in who we are as a people. Beginning with requisite government exchanges, this curiosity has begun to spread to pilgrimages and specific national and cultural events, such as the recent Bahrain F1, which kicked off this year's Formula One season. As we see this foundational work pour forth such fruit at a wonderfully more aggressive pace than anyone had anticipated, I strongly am encouraged about the future, about next steps. The key to the future of any next steps is capturing this enthusiasm, this momentum. For it is this momentum that will be the catalyst by which future success is assured. And the most effective way to assure the continued growth of that momentum is to assure that the Accords touch as many people and their lives as possible. Simply put, the more people that are exposed to the bridges that have been built, the more lives will be impacted. The more lives impacted, the more advocates for this platform of peace that will undoubtedly have support around the region. As for you, as American Jewish leaders, you are uniquely situated to be the most impactful advocates to spread this exposure. Your ability to be vocal and participatory, especially with investments, holds the most promise to bridge others under the cover of this blanket of peace and security. With your presence in the United States, your exposure in Israel, and your introductions into Bahrain, you serve as the best linchpin to manifest the substantive success that can carry this partnership forward. Although culture, religion, and even athletics are all forms by which our people can connect, it is the business sector that will undoubtedly serve as a driving force, pushing us from this initial phase of government-to-government connections to the next, more widespread phase of our relationship. It is not hard to see the benefits that can come from Jewish American investors expanding their Israeli-based technology and business interests by taking advantage of the newly established U.S. trade zone in Bahrain, or Israeli business leaders having their U.S.-based business interests use the same trade zone in Bahrain to access the expanded region as cost-effectively as it is seamless. So, as we move further down this path together, please know that although you hold a uniquely critical role in the continued success of the Accords, you are not alone. I, my office, my fellow citizens in Bahrain, all remain ready and willing to help, partner, and prosper together.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today at JCPA's annual conference. I'm incredibly grateful to be here at this exciting time as USAID begins its implementation of the Nida M. Lowy Middle East Partnership for Peace Act, or MEPA for short. For those of you who I haven't met, my name is Kari, Reid, and I am the U.S. Director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace, also known as ALLMEP. ALLMEP is the largest alliance of peace-building organizations in the Middle East working to expand trust-building interactions between Israelis and Palestinians. ALLMEP advocates to maintain and grow government resources for Israeli-Palestinian peace-building programs and ensure that this important work is amplified with policymakers around the globe. We are very pleased to share that after over a decade of advocacy from ALLMEP's members and a broad coalition of important supporting groups like JCPA, that USAID has officially launched the Partnership for Peace Fund through MEPA, which together with the DFC's Joint Investment for Peace Initiative will invest over $250 million over the next 5 years in civil society organizations and economic development programs in the region. Together, these USAID and DFC programs are designed to create the right conditions for successful Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking. This U.S. government investment represents the largest and longest-term commitment to this work in history. And again, this funding and the programs that will flow from it were made possible through the advocacy of so many groups like JCPA, who tirelessly promoted this legislation. So big thank you to all of you who worked so hard to make this a reality. Already, USAID has made 3 awards under the Partnership for Peace Fund, which invests over $8 million in various sectors, including water security, private sector engagement, and women's entrepreneurship. I am delighted to be joined today by the Honorable George Salem, who has been appointed by USAID Administrator Samantha Power as the inaugural board chair of the Partnership for Peace Fund Advisory Board. This advisory board, which includes 12 individuals appointed by a bipartisan group of Congress members, will provide recommendations on the types of projects USAID should pursue to build toward a lasting peace and sustainable two-state solution. Mr. Salem brings with him decades of experience advocating for peace between Israelis and Palestinians and is widely regarded as a bipartisan consensus builder. We are excited to work with Mr. Salem and the wider board to ensure that this moment of opportunity is maximized. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to ask George a few questions today at the JCPA conference to learn more about him and what he hopes to accomplish as chair of the Partnership for Peace Fund. So, Mr. Salem, I'll start by asking first, can you tell us a little bit more about why you decided to accept this role as chair of the PPF board?
Thank you, Kari, and let me say what a pleasure it is to be with you and with addressing the JCPA annual conference. It's a huge honor to have been selected by Administrator Power to serve as the inaugural chair of the Partnership for Peace Fund. As a Palestinian American, I've been involved, excuse me, in peace building endeavors for many years. Among them are the Breaking the Impasse initiative, which is sponsored by the World Economic Forum, which has Palestinians and Israeli business leaders, as well as representatives from the diaspora, come together annually in Davos and discuss common goals for economic solutions to the issue. I'm a member of the Palestinian Business Committee for Peace and Reform, where we meet with policymakers in the US frequently here in the United States, and the Middle East Investment Initiative, which is where we have created over 33,000 good-paying jobs in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem for Palestinians through loan guarantee funds from OPIC, or currently called the DFC. So this effort is a culmination of those kinds of endeavors through the years.
Got it. Thank you so much. And can you say a little bit more about why you care about peace building?
Well, as a Palestinian American, when you see the effects, and I've traveled there frequently since the early 80s, when you see the effects of occupation on the Palestinian people, you're compelled to do all you can to assist. The Middle East Partnership for Peace Act is about improving lives. It's not about politics. I've been a strong advocate of bipartisan consensus building. It's what I've devoted my professional career to doing as well. And MEPA is not a solution to this conflict. Only good faith negotiations will achieve that. However, if we can improve the daily lives of the Palestinian people and get the constituencies in the grassroots constituencies in Israel and on the Palestinian side working together, to achieve common goals. And I think we will be in a position where a two-state solution will be better realized when the time comes.
Thank you. And what sectors interest you most? And maybe if you could say a few words about how is this effort different from those that have come before?
A good question. This effort has major funds committed for a more extensive period of time than any in history. $250 million a year, $250 million at $50 million a year for 5 years. That's an enormous commitment to people programs, as well as economic expansion and skills development and joint ventures and job creation. So we're hopeful that we can assist with developing these kinds of initiatives through the funding provided by the US government in this program.
Okay. And in the best case scenario, what does success look like for MEPA and the PPF board?
Well, success for me, it's a very bipartisan board appointed by both sides, the majority and minority in the House and the Senate, and of the relevant committees. So success may differ for different people, but for me, success as the inaugural chair, it means deploying our resources in a way that best realizes the goals which Congress intended when they passed the statute, which are, the ultimate goal is to build the conditions for a two-state solution. That means major joint ventures between Palestinians, Israelis, and Americans and others. It means measurable improvements in job opportunities and the digital economy in the West Bank and Gaza. We have so many young, talented Palestinians who could use mentoring from their Israeli colleagues, as well as colleagues throughout the world in the high-tech space. It means enhanced progress in STEM education, especially for women and girls. And it means pulling together these various strands in order to create enhanced conditions on the ground for a two-state solution. That, to me, is how we would define success of MEPA. And hopefully this program will be around for the full 5 years, and we'll see how it does.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Salem, for your thoughts. Really appreciate it. And I want to, yeah, of course. And I want to conclude today's conversation by again just extending a huge thanks to JCPA for all of your support and for hosting us today. We hope that you have a fantastic rest of your conference.
My name is Kari Vaccaro, and I'm a junior at Touro University's Lander College for Women. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of speaking to you tonight as a representative of Touro University, a proud sponsor of the 2022 plenary. Freedom is not an easy concept to define. Although it is tempting to categorize it in grand terms, subtler acts of freedom are just as deserving of the title. Every person strives for freedom, regardless of citizenship, religion, race, gender, or socioeconomic status. Dr. Bernard Lander founded Touro University with the intent of bringing freedom of opportunity to all. He dedicated his life to ensure that every person from any walk of life could have access to an education that would open doors for their future. Dr. Lander's persistence in attaining that goal was a remarkable success. With over 20,000 students enrolled in academic and occupational programs for all graduate levels throughout this country and overseas, his vision impacts students daily. I am a prime example. I grew up in northern Westchester County, New York, in the village of Mount Kisco, and attended fantastic public schools in my district from kindergarten through 12th grade. There, I had the freedom to pursue my secular goals, and I took advantage of my choices to the maximum. I joined the swim and field hockey teams, tried out for the softball team, got cut from the softball team, learned to play the viola, and participated in every one of my school's plays. And although I appreciate the many opportunities my public school had to offer, it was limiting for me in that Judaism was not part of my daily curriculum. So while I did have the freedom to be a Jew, something not to be taken lightly, I was not in a situation where Jewish values were meshed with everyday existence, and that was something that I missed greatly. Dr. Lander was not only the founder of Turo, but he was also instrumental in writing the MacIver Report, the document that eventually established the JCPA, which embodies freedom in all capacities. It not only mobilizes to help break the bonds of injustice, but forms initiatives to tackle diverse community, domestic, and international issues, including educating the public on Judaism and Israel, and encouraging the US-Israel relationship, a topic which is very close to my heart, especially after having spent a year and a half in Israel before coming to Turo. If it weren't for Dr. Lander's creation of Turo and the extraordinary leadership of his successor, Dr. Alan Kadish, I would not currently be enrolled in an institute where Torah values permeate the halls. I can finally pursue all of my dreams, surrounded by people who share that same enthusiasm. Recently, upon the realization that medicine was not my true passion, I had the option to change my major, which may seem trivial, but it created a world of possibilities for me. As a newly ordained political science major, I can now pursue the avenues that have always intrigued me and will lead to the self-discovery of my true calling. I appreciate what opportunities for freedom are worth, which is why I am proud to identify with the JCPA's mission of enhancing freedoms, both personal and on a global level. Thank you.
Wow, what a day we have had. I think we can agree that our conference conversations and workshops have been inspiring, calling us to action. And welcome to what I promise you will be one more outstanding session. In just 4 days, we will gather with friends and family. I will be together here with my family in Scarsdale, New York, a new place for us. We will ask ourselves, our children, and all around our Seder tables, what does it mean to be free? And how can we each work towards that goal? We have asked leaders from the 4 leading streams of Judaism represented within JCPA to help us connect the teachings from the Haggadah with the messages of our conference. We hope that today's sessions have sparked a 5th question to raise at your Seder. What will I do this year to deepen my involvement in fighting for freedom? How can I help build a world that exemplifies our JCPA values of a just, pluralistic, and democratic society? Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Zev Eleff, President of Gratz College, Rabbi Mira Rivera, Associate Rabbi and Director of Pastoral Care at Romemu, Rabbi Amy Eilberg, Rabbinical Assembly, and Rabbi Jonah Pesner, Director of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and Senior Vice President of the Union for Reform Judaism. Our panelists will each speak for about 5 minutes, and then we will all come together for a few minutes of conversation at the end. Rabbi Eleff.
Thank you so much, Susan. Wow. I love from logging in at 11 in the morning and participating and listening. I'm full of wisdom, and I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot more of that wisdom from my colleagues. As Susan had indicated, I'm the relatively new president of Gratz College, and so I thought it was fitting to begin with a little bit of wisdom from our forebears there. That's Rebecca Gratz. Before there was Henrietta Zoll, before there was Emma Lazarus, it was Rebecca Gratz, who was probably the most well-known Jewish woman in the United States. In her time in the early 19th century, maybe just a handful of nationally known Jewish figures in the United States. And in 1819, I found a letter that Rebecca Gratz in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, wrote a letter to her brother, Benjamin Gratz, in Lexington, Kentucky. And in it, she looks forward to, he didn't come, but that Benjamin should bring his family back to Philadelphia. She asked year in and year out for the Passover holiday. And she writes that Purim, this is in 1819, on Purim, the previous Jewish holiday, nothing is required of us but to be glad and merry. But Rebecca Gratz thought Passover was different. It summoned her. For that, it was her favorite holiday. It was full of meaning-making, storytelling, and ritual. It was a call to action. Well, my limud, my learning with all of you this afternoon is the very beginning of the Magid section, the storytelling section of the Haggadah, and that's Halach Ma'anya. And there is, on point with our conference this morning and this afternoon, a call to action. Halach Ma'anya, discussing the bread of our affliction, of our destitution, quickly rolls into Kol Dichvin Yitvei V'Yechol. Whoever is famished should come and eat. Whatever we had accomplished prior in the Haggadah, that we made Kiddush, for example, we recited a blessing on the wine, and we had a little bit of a give and take with vegetables and herbs. That was quite fine, but anybody, now we're going to restart the Haggadah at this moment with the storytelling section of Magid. But if that's the case, then something's missing, isn't it? When Jews begin something, they begin with a blessing. And Magid, although we recited Kiddush, we recited a blessing on wine, Magid does not have a blessing. We don't bless that enterprise of storytelling and recalling the Exodus from Egypt. Nowhere at all. Well, that's quite different. Although Rebecca Gratz wasn't so high on Purim in her time, at least not compared to what Passover would become, we do have a blessing on Purim, don't we? Right before reciting the Megillah, we recite that we have a blessing, She'asa Nisim. We recall the miracles of Purim, and that we're about to recount in the scroll of Esther. Similarly, later on in history, but earlier on in the Hebrew calendar, we have Hanukkah. And there too, we find a similar bracha, a similar blessing, that of She'asa Nisim. We recall the we recall the miracle of Hanukkah. And in fact, in the actual liturgical rendition of the She'asa Nisim blessing, of that miracle, of the blessing on miracles, we tell a bit of the story. So in the Shemona Esrei, in the 18 benedictions, She'asa Nisim on Purim is followed by recounting, in brief, the story of the victory of Mordechai and Esther over the cruel Haman. And in the attendant blessing of She'asa Nisim on Hanukkah, we have a little bit of the story of the Maccabees and how Matityahu and his sons were somehow, even though they were far fewer than the Greeks, somehow were able to vanquish that Assyrian army. So why? So just to recap, the question at least, on every other holiday, when we recall the miracles that happened to our ancestors, we have a blessing. But when it comes to Passover, we don't. There are many, many different answers for why we don't have a She'asa Nisim, why we don't bless the miracle and the storytelling. I'm just going to offer one, hopefully one that you can take with you into your Seder. And that's offered by Rabbi Amram Gaon, who lived something about 1,100 years ago. And he writes, Mishum de Yom Yeshuahu the Adif, which fits in directly into the theme of our conference. It is a Yom Yeshua. It isn't just a day of miracles, but it is a day of Yeshua, salvation, or all loosely translated, of freedom. Well, freedom cannot be restrained to one formulation. When you bring everybody into your house for the Haggadah, when you start to recount the stories, you can't be so narrow as to have one formulation of the story. Instead, you have to embrace all kinds of stories. It has to be the miracle and the salvation of Passover from Egypt, but every single Passover we've had in Jewish history hence. And that's why we can't restrict it. We can't narrow it, reduce it to one solitary blessing and tell one story, because the miracle of freedom, the miracle Mishum Shiyom Yeshuahu, that it's a day of freedom, and Adi, that it is better, it towers over the other miracles, is because we have to embrace all the different permutations of freedom. And for that, we can't begin with the blessing. And that call to action, where we bring ourselves in and all of our guests, whoever we want, whoever can make it into our Seder, we have to be open-minded about freedom. We have to embrace all the different incarnations, all the different permutations of what freedom means to me and what freedom can mean to you.
Issachar Koach says, beautiful.
Hard act to follow. Here we go, but continuing the Magid. The telling of the Passover story. It's dramatic, it's cinematic, it's larger than life. But my attention is drawn by what I detect as silent screams hidden in plain hearing. Silent stories hidden in plain seeing. The first silent scream that I detect occurs in Exodus 13, verse 17. And it says, "And it was that Pharaoh had sent the people, Vayhi b'shalach Paro et ha'am," that he had let the people go. Rabbeinu Hananel, a rabbi from the 11th century Tunisia, what we know as Tunisia today, noted that whenever the word Vayehi is mentioned, it always introduced an expression of pain. Lashon tza'ak is the verse, is the term. Lashon tza'ak here, this expression of anguish is being experienced by the Pharaoh, by Paro. He let the people go. Then he made a dizzying 360-degree turn. That first silent scream I detect was from this word Vayehi, about a humiliated military man deity. A second silent scream. We have the background of an army of about 600 elite soldiers on horses and chariots bearing down on the Israelites. Shemot Rabbah sets this mise-en-scène. And the people then in this scene turn to Moshe and demand, Moshe, is it because there is an insufficiency of graves in Egypt that you took us from there to here? To this wilderness? Leave us alone that we may serve Egypt. Moshe then calmly looks at the people and says, Al tira'u, don't fear. Stand firm and see. The Lord will battle for you and you shall remain silent. While Moshe is calming the people down, I detect behind these words a second silent scream. But there's no mention of Moshe crying out, yet it seems as if God addresses some kind of outcry that only divine ears could hear, could detect. And the words go, why are you crying out to me? Ma titz'ak alai. That same lashon ta'ak, the same language of anguish. Speak to the people and let them go forward. Now, Rashi, the biblical commentator from 11th century northern France, noted that at that precise moment, Moshe was standing in prolonged prayer. Standing in prolonged prayer. Was Moshe crying out for some kind of simanim, of some kind of sign, divine sign? But then God says, just speak to your people and move it. The third scream, the third silent scream. The people have crossed a sea that had split in two, and they look back at the churning waters that swallowed those who were in pursuit of them. And from these slaves whose spirits had been crushed by cruel bondage, I detect a third silent scream. Anguish, sorrow, and angst turning into song. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says that the highest way in which humans express deep sorrow and angst is by turning it into song. In our Passover, the song transforms and the song ensues. The song, we open our mouth, and when you open your mouth, you can either produce silence, blessing, curse, scream, or song. And the choice of our people to take captivity and chaos and transform it into a song changed us forever. And of those silent screams that have been stuffed down throats, oftentimes sputtering out only when it is safe, which is beside the point, anguish ripping vocal cords raw. When we stuff down our own Exodus stories deep down in our throats to rally around more benign, pressing concerns that affect only the universal, some of us wake up restless at 3 a.m. in the morning when there is a call of another frequency of another order that many do not hear, but some hear. If I can just say the last words in spoken word cadence, there's reason to worry because multiply we have and multiplied and we are the other. Not Sephardi, not Mizrahi, not Ashkenazi, yet Jews are we. We eat with fingers, we dine with fine crystal, Jews are we. Cheeks blooming peach, warm roasted, coffee desert brown, midnight blue black, Jews are we. Single mother, empty nester, child, queer, straight, shut in, Jews are we. With disabilities, Torah-wielding Jews, we may be childless by choice, by biology, adopted, partnered, married, separated, menopausal, or 36 under 36, awesome Jews are we. Above and below in the zoomagog of these pandemic years, politically to the left, to the right, to the center, we volunteer, we serve, we protest. We are Jew in the pew report Jew, Jews are we. Forever the stranger, forever wrestling, yet proud to be Jews are we. May we hear the high-frequency silent screams hidden in plain hearing, and may we find the silent stories hidden in plain seeing. Dibarti.
Wow. Wow, Yishar Kochech, Mira, so beautiful. So I also want to share a moment of the Magid, such a beloved moment of the Magid, and Susan and I were thinking along the same lines, and I'll tell you what I mean. I'd like to pose 4 questions for each of us, for all of us, as Jewish community leaders on this Erev Pesach, this eve of Passover. Question 1, why do we tell the Passover story as we do? Have you ever thought about why the Torah tells the story of the Exodus from Egypt as it does? It's so natural to us that it seems like there's only one way, there's only this way, but actually when a people has suffered collective trauma, there are 2 very different ways to respond going forward. The message to take away from the experience could very well be never again, meaning such a thing shall never happen to our people again. We know this instinct well, and it has for good reason become a sacred imperative for the Jewish people. But that is emphatically not the lesson the Torah directs us to derive from our experience in Egypt. The Torah commands us famously with extraordinary frequency and consistency to carry our experience of enslavement and liberation with us through history, but not for ourselves alone. We are instructed to live as a people with the rallying cry, never again, for all people. Our task is to champion the rights and dignity of all so that oppression never again happens to anyone. This is our charge and our calling as a people, even though at times, such as this one, it may seem like an impossible task. We dare to hold this as our deepest aspiration. Question number 2. What does the Passover story demand of you this year? The Haggadah tells us that each of us must see ourselves as personally liberated and uniquely commanded to contribute to the liberation of others. It is not enough to know that others are doing the good work and even cheer them on. Each of us must commit our time, our strength, our talents, and our resources to the task. How will you devote yourself to a more free and fair America in the year to come? Please stop for a moment and write on a piece of paper or type out on a note on your computer a kavanah, an intention for the contribution you personally want to make toward the goal of a more just and kind world. Write it in a place where you will be able to refer back to it at various points through the year, and perhaps as you're approaching Pesach in 2023. And if you'd like, type it into the chat so we can all be inspired by one another's hopes. I'll give us just half a minute or so to gather those kavanot. As you continue, I go on with question 3. What does the Passover story demand of us as a community? We have spent this day in an enlightening and inspiring community gathering committed to the work of freedom and dignity for all people. We've listened deeply to the commanding voice of the Haggadah and the Passover story itself and applied it to the critical challenges of our time. We've heard about challenges to democracy, about a torn social fabric, about racism and anti-Semitism, and of course, about Ukraine. In your own words, what do you think the Passover story calls our community to do and to be in the year to come? Again, please take a moment. Maybe I'll give you 15 seconds for starters and write a sentence or two, and feel free to place it in the chat before I come back with question 4. Not seeing them in the chat, but maybe it's unfair to ask you. I'll have one more question for you, so if something comes up, I'd love to see some of your thoughts. Question 4: how will we know when Pesach comes around again in 2023 that we have done what was required of us as individuals and as a community? We cannot predict or control the future. Many new triumphs and challenges will surely cross our paths between now and Pesach of 2023, but we can and we must direct our own efforts such that our words and our prayers this Passover will guide our activism in the year to come. What do we want to be proud of when we lift a glass at next year's Seder? Just another moment to wrap up. Just waiting to see if anybody's typing. But if you're holding it in your heart, that's what's most important. I'll just conclude. We end the Seder with the words L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, in the city whose name is peace. By Passover 2023, may we live in a nation that is more caring, collaborative, and committed to the needs of all people. May we live in a world that is at least somewhat more kind and more just. And regardless of what happens that is beyond our control, may we know that we did our part, that we gave of our gifts, our time, and our resources to partner with God in making the world a better place than it is today. Amen.
Rabbi Amy Eilberg, let's just take a moment to celebrate your teaching and to do the most sacred Jewish act in history, which is to ask a question. And then, of course, make space for the people to wrestle and to think. And to Rabbis Rivera and Eleff, I'm trembling in following in the teachings of 3 great rabbis. Maybe if I do well, you'll ordain me right now. We begin to close, and I think I'm going to get the last rabbinic word, which fills me with even more humility and some awe. Let's all just thank and celebrate the great people of the Jewish Council on Public Affairs. All of our movements represented on the screen and organizations or agencies are blessed to be part of the JCPA family, which seeks to bring the Jewish people together to speak with one voice in the spirit of our tradition, that doing justice and loving mercy and dwelling together with the Holy One is who we are and who we want to be. And so one final reflection, just to add, maybe this will be the Torah that breaks the camel's back, but we'll try. We're going to gather, many of us, at the diverse and gloriously different Seder tables that Rabbi Rivera painted a picture of in the diversity of the Jewish community that we are. And we'll tell the story differently, and we'll celebrate it differently, and our melodies may be different, and the recipes and the smells and the arguments and the debates may be different. But it'll all be rooted in the injunction from Exodus 13:8, when we are commanded that we are supposed to teach our child on that day of the miracle, of the great thing, of the deeds, what God did for me when I went free from Egypt. And we've heard already the rabbinic injunction that in every generation, we are supposed to see ourselves as if we ourselves came out of Egypt, as if we ourselves were slaves and then we were free. And so it is that we gather at our tables year after year after year, and we do the Haggadah, the Magid, as Rabbi Eleff referenced, the telling of the story. It's the master story of the Jewish people. It's that story we tell over and over again because it's who we are and who we want to be becoming. There is data that suggests that of all the things that people could do that are Jewish, observing Shabbat, keeping kosher, going to the high holidays, the one thing that most Jews and people who are Jewish adjacent do is show up to a Seder, whatever else they do, because they want to write themselves into this story of redemption. I remember once, because I always invite a diverse array of people to my Seder table to be part of the retelling of the story. I was sitting next to the amazing Governor Deval Patrick of the state of Massachusetts, and I was explaining everything as we went. I was telling each symbol and ritual and blessing what it was and why we do it. And he turned to me at one point, he said, "Jonah, what do you think? This is my first Seder?" It's this thing we do as Jews. We bring this extended family in and we tell the story. And we reference the text, which tells us that in telling our story, we are reliving our own emancipation. And so it is that the Torah repeats 36 different times, 36 different ways. We were slaves in Egypt, and then we were freed. And therefore, we are to love, not tolerate, not put up with. We are to love the stranger. Think of the radical empathy. Think of all the Torah you've learned from these three rabbis, and this whole day of learning is all contained in that radical Jewish notion rooted in 5,000 years of our text and tradition of empathy. One time we're told to love our fellow, love our neighbor, love the person who's like us. But 36 different times, 36 different ways, we're commanded to have this empathy for the person who is other, who is the stranger, who is not like us, because we have had the experience of oppression, of bondage, of suffering. It calls us to action, and that action shows up as love. King famously taught us, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that, just as hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so it is that master story of redemption, the story of the Exodus, has us replay the narrative to remind us of three core teachings we take with us into this season of our liberation and our freedom, leveraging this conference and its learnings into our Passover Seders, into the world we live in. One, resistance to injustice is always possible. Shifra and Pua and Miriam and Yocheved and Pharaoh's own daughter teach us resistance to injustice is always possible. Pharaoh's evil decree of enslavement and genocide was not inevitable. The 5 righteous women who organized and rose up remind us we can always resist. Number 2, it is about the widow, the stranger, the orphan, and the poor, the most marginalized, the most oppressed among us. There is the incredible story that as soon as we came out of our liberation from Egypt, Amalek attacked us and attacked the stragglers at the rear. And we're supposed to ban the name of Amalek because he took down the stragglers. But the Hasidic literature says, no, Israel, the sin was ours. How dare we allow there to be stragglers at the rear? To have been enslaved and then to be free is to love the other, the person who is most vulnerable. And finally, our redemption as a people, the transformation from a people enslaved, from a people oppressed, does not happen just by passing through the sea into the wanderings of the desert. The book of Exodus does not end with the plagues and the parting of the sea. The book of Exodus, the transformation of our people, culminates at Sinai. To be free in Jewish tradition is to stand at the mountain assembled with a mixed multitude and to say, Na'aseh v'nishma, we cast off the yoke of oppression and we take on the sacred obligation of Torah to do justice and to love mercy in the spirit of our tradition and of our texts. It is to enter into the covenant, to stand with our people and all people everywhere. Obligated not only to tell the story of redemption, but to live it. Chag Sameach, and may this Pesach be the season of our liberation for all people everywhere.
Yasher koach, Jonah.
Yasher koach, yasher kochek. Should I say vote for you? No. But those are the values. Those are the values of our people. And those are the values that we stand for and live for.
It's how we make meaning, right?
How we poke through our stories.
And
how we weave.
And you articulated it so beautifully, Jonah.
I was just harnessing the great teachings of all the 4 rabbis on the screen, believe me. David Bohm, save us from rabbis that are finally silenced by their own words. Where do we go from here?
First off, I don't want my rabbis to be silent. And what a great way to end our conference with the call to action from our rabbis. I want to give my heartfelt thanks to each of you for sharing your thoughts with us in advance of Passover. Certainly has motivated me to think about what I'll be doing at my Passover Seder this year with my family and good friends. So Rabbi Amy asked, what is it that you are going to do? And there only was one answer, but I thought it was a great answer. It was from Larry Greenfield. He said, I'm not going to be silent. And that is perhaps the greatest gift that we have as Jews, is that we will not be silent in the face of injustice. And that is the mission of JCPA, not to be silent in the face of injustice, but to try and rectify, to try to practice tikkun olam, to repair the world. As our session today comes to close, I want to encourage everyone to attend the movie tonight, which is followed by a talk-back session. If you didn't get a chance to watch the movie, please join us at 6 p.m. Eastern. It's a very thoughtful and impactful film. Either way, please join us for a discussion with the movie producers and directors at 8 p.m. Eastern. The new movie and program will take place using the link on the Zoom events that was sent to you. I know you'll join me in expressing thanks to our conference co-chairs, Susan Bravenel and Lee Goldberg, and also to Melanie Gorelick, Haya Luftig, and the rest of the team at JCPA and the consultants who helped work in planning and coordinating this wonderful program. It's my hope that our conference has illustrated to you the importance of JCPA's ongoing work. I encourage you to consider supporting us with your contributions so that JCPA has the necessary resources to address the challenges facing our Jewish community. There's a link in the chat box that will take you to our website where you can express your appreciation and support. Again, thank you for attending JCPA 2022 and Hag Sameach Pesach. Thank you all.
Humbly hearted, rise, won't be divided, rise, with spirit to guide us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in a hope, in prayer, we're right here, in a hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here, in hope, in prayer, we're right here, and we rise, all of the children rise, elders with wisdom rise, ancestors surround us, rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here.